Welcome to the channel. Today I'll be talking about the tragic story of Freu Freu and Helen Bishop. It is known that only 3 dogs on the Titanic survived the sinking out of 12. A story that has always touched my heart was the story of Freu Freu and Helen Bishop. In a newspaper article, Helen Bishop recounts when she first met Freu Freu in Italy. She was a really beautiful dog. As soon as I saw her in Florence, I loved her. Dick wasn't looking forward to it, but when he found out about my pregnancy, he bought it for me as a gift. At the time, Bishop was 19 years old and had only been married to her husband for a few months. Freu Freu was believed to be a toy poodle. Helen Bishop describes what happened once they boarded the Titanic. She was so pretty that when I went to drop her off in the room reserved for dogs on the Titanic, the officer told me that a beauty like her could sleep with us. I made her a bed in our cabin with some suitcases and blankets, but Freu Freu was unruly, and more than once he broke some of the dresses that I was posing on the bed. Other small dogs who had happened to be in the same stateroom as their owners, and not in the kennels, were able to be carried out and sneaked into the lifeboats by their owners, but poor Freu Freu was not among the dogs that were rescued. In the Daily News, published on the 20th of April 1912, Helen expresses her heartbreak in leaving her dog behind on the Titanic. It broke my heart to leave my little dog Freu Freu in my stateroom. I made a little den for her in our room behind 2 of my suitcases, but when I started to leave her, she tore my dresses to bits, tugging at it. I realized, however, that there would be little sympathy for a woman carrying a dog in her arms when there were lives of women and children to be saved. Now, every time I hear this story, I can imagine her little dog's heart full of fear, desperately trying to get her owner to stay with her or take her with her. Dogs have significantly better senses than us humans, especially in hearing. I am willing to bet that all the dogs would have heard the impact of the iceberg hitting the ship and the water rushing into the ship. I have no doubt that Freu Freu sensed that something was wrong that night. It does break my heart to think of her dog being completely alone and helpless in a room that will be filled with water within the next 3 hours. I cannot judge Helen too harshly. Some people argue she did the right thing, and others argue that she should have wrapped her dog in a blanket and sneaked her aboard one of the lifeboats, as the other dog owners did. However, if her dog was truly as unruly as she claims, it may have been too difficult to wrap Freu Freu up in a blanket and keep her calm. As a dog owner myself, I cannot imagine being in a situation where I would have to leave a member of my family behind. I think this is a truly tragic situation to be in, as it has been proven that many of the lifeboats left half full, and perhaps hundreds of more lives could have been saved. I think it is easy to pass judgment onto others in hindsight. People nowadays love to imagine how they would have reacted and what they would have done, and I suppose we imagine we would pick the better option, the high moral ground even. However, I would be forever grateful not to be put into the same position as Helen Bishop was. Helen and her husband survived the Titanic. They happened to board Lifeboat 7, the first lifeboat to leave on the starboard side, at 12:45 a.m. Freu Freu means happy in German, although others have said she named the dog after a character in a popular book or show. If you look into what happened to Helen after the Titanic disaster, it seems as if Helen's life was cloaked in tragedy, almost as if when Freu Freu passed, so did Helen's happiness. On December 9th, 1912, Helen gave birth to a baby boy, Randall Walton Bishop, but he died only 2 days later. It is rumoured that a fortune teller in Egypt told Helen she would survive a shipwreck and an earthquake, but will die in an automobile accident. Well, in November 1913, she was involved in an automobile accident where her husband hit a tree and Helen was ejected from the car and hit her head on the concrete pavement. She suffered a skull fracture, Her injuries were so severe that New York Times had published on November 6, 1913, that she was dying. She had to get a steel plate in her head, and it was said after the accident her mental state had changed. However, I couldn't find any source that said exactly how her mental state had changed, or any medical diagnosis. She wasn't quite herself, but she survived the accident. In January 1916, her husband divorced her. The Chicago Examiner published an article on the 18th of January in 1916 saying that Helen charges cruelty and drunkenness in the divorce proceedings and was granted $100,000 in alimony. Later, in 1916, she fell while visiting friends and died. She was only 23 years old. In some twisted irony, her death was published in the local newspaper on the front page, which was the same page where her former husband announced his new marriage. Helen Bishop and Freu Freu's story is a sad one. They both deserved better endings. May they both rest in peace.